In this training session, we're going to take a look at the capabilities of the EventSentry heartbeat monitor. Looking at this picture here, you can see that on the bottom of this picture, we have ICMP ping and TCP ports for all hosts. So no matter what device you have, a switch, a Windows host, a printer, we can obviously monitor the host with ping. So to see, is the host actually alive and well? Is it responding to pings? Is there a packet delay? There usually is, unless you're pinging the local machine. And what is the packet delay? Is there a packet loss? And so forth. For TCP ports, the same thing applies to all hosts, and we can see if that port is responding or not. When we're monitoring Windows hosts, we can monitor the EventSentry agent. So that tells us, is the agent actually running? And if you're using the collector, we can also detect if data has been flowing from the agent. So just the agent running is, of course, the minimum requirement, just like a host responding to a ping is the minimum, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the agent is working correctly. So if you're using the collector, you have a little bit more insight. Moving up to Unix and Linux machines, if you utilize SNMP, then we can get a little bit more information. So because obviously just checking TCP ports and pings is great. We know the host is running. We know that maybe the SSH daemon is running if port 22 is open, but that doesn't really tell us whether a required process is running on that host, if it's running out of disk space and so forth. So with SNMP, we can get a little bit more system information, and I'm going to illustrate that in a little bit in the web reports. We can check disk space, we can check if a process is running or not, and we can also query any numerical OIDs. So CPU usage, things like that is something we can do with SNMP. If you have SSH enabled, and you configure that in EventSentry, then you can get a little bit more of system information, such as the supported USB version, for example, and some more details about the hardware. And you can also monitor services, which are usually referred to as daemons on Linux. So if somebody adds, removes, stops, or starts a service in Ubuntu, for example, then if you have SSH access, then you can monitor that. And then finally, on network switches using SNMP, you can also obtain the switch port mapping. So you can see which switch ports are active and which MAC addresses are connected to it. So now let's take a look at some of the reporting with all those heartbeat monitoring options we just looked at. The quickest way to see that is if we go to the host page and we're going to select one of the Linux machines here. So let's start with our firewall. So that's a pfSense firewall. There's not a whole lot we can see here, but we can see the description of the device, including OS versions. We can see how much memory is installed, disk space information, and the uptime. Via SNMP, it's also obtaining the network devices, including MAC address. We can also see which switch port they are attached to, interface speed, and all the mounted disks. If you click on the Performance tab, you can see all the SNMP performance counters it's able to retrieve. So for example, 1% CPU usage, 145 megabytes of free RAM. We can see all the running processes. So that would be something that's running on a pfSense firewall, for example, here. And let's switch this over to a Linux machine. So here we have a little bit more information. So we see which platform this is. We can see which time zone it's at. We have a little bit more information about the actual hardware, which processors, hyperthreading, processor speed, number of cores, and so forth. That's information that's only available if you have SSH connected. Same goes for the USB version. We don't see network information on this particular host, but we do have all the mount points listed here and the disk space. And again, just like with the other one, we have SNMP data, in this case also the page file, network utilization, again all the processes that are running. This is just a default machine, so there's nothing special really to see here, but this is basically part of the core processes running on a basic Linux machine. We can see some recent changes about services that are dynamically being added and removed. And then finally, we also have a Cisco switch here. Not so much information here, so we don't have any information on disk space here. We have the current uptime. Of course, we have all the network cards, network interfaces that are in the switch, including their MAC addresses and interface speeds, which is useful, and some of the counters which are restricted to the network interfaces. So that's the type of information you can expect to see from non-Windows machines. For Cisco switches, or for any switch for that matter, we can also see switch mapping. So if we click here, we have one switch configured here. I'm going to select that, click on a detailed view, and here's a switch. And in this demo network, we can see the hosts connected that are connected to each individual port. So port 1, we have a physical Dell server connected to it. Port 9, we have another Dell server with a different MAC address connected. And we can also see that these virtual machines here are also connected to port 9, which means that they're essentially virtual machines. And we can see this anyway with the icon here. EventSentry detected that. And we can see that they're all connected to this Dell machine. And then we have a few more machines, including the HP Linux machine, the firewall, the pfSense, which is using a Global Technologies network card, and then 2 more machines with some other network interface.